My concerns about the assumptions and generalizations of multiculturalism are echoed by the sociologist Ulrich Beck, who says the following: "For a long time now, we have been hearing a lot about cultural relativism, multiculturalism, tolerance, internationalism, and ad nauseum globalization. All of the above ideas are based on the premise of difference, of alienation, of the strangeness of the other. Multiculturalism, for example, means that various ethnic groups live side by side within a single state, while tolerance means acceptance even when it goes against the grain, putting up with difference as an unavoidable burden. Cosmopolitan tolerance, on the other hand, is much more than that. It is neither defensive nor passive, but active. It means opening oneself up to the world of the other, perceiving difference as an enrichment, regarding others as fundamentally equal. Cosmopolitanism, then, absolutely does not mean uniformity or homogenization. Individuals, groups, communities, political organizations, cultures and civilizations wish to and must remain diverse, even unique. But to put it metaphorically, the walls between them must be replaced with bridges. Here is a very direct challenge to which all facets of society should listen. A call to action which, if accepted, requires a considerable shift in emphasis throughout our community, in political language and government policy, in the ways we choose to educate ourselves, in the shape and design of both our physical realities, our cities, suburbs, dwellings and public spaces, as well as our patterns of thought and behaviour, our customs, belief systems, and perhaps most of all, and most relevant to tonight's presentation, the role of our artists and our arts organisations to perceive and define their roles in this kind of future. I would like us to take a moment to consider carefully a course of action which Ulrich Beck urges, to take up his challenge to build bridges between minds, mentalities and imaginations, but also within nations, localities and institutions, and to contemplate how the cosmopolitanism which Professor Beck describes might find its way to influencing the shape of a discourse on the arts in Australia today. I'm going to be quite deliberately provocative and draw my example from an art form that many in this room would identify exclusively as a European art form. An art form that has the additional difficulty of being elaborate and expensive. I'm going to use as my illustration a point that I think can be referred to and taken as a generalisation for other art forms, but I'm going to specifically refer to that genre that is so loved and loathed by many of us, opera. Furthermore, I want to continue this provocation by referring to the ideas of two giants of European culture, two very complex and often controversial individuals, Richard Wagner and Claudio Monteverdi. In his famous essay of 1849, entitled Die Kunst und die Revolution, Art and Revolution, Richard Wagner's use of a very complex and very multisyllabic word, Gesamtkunstwerk, the idea of a total, all-embracing artwork, is a restatement of an ancient idea. He was exploring not only relationships between words and music, dance and theatre, but much else besides. An intrinsic concept whereby the combination of various art forms were to be fused inextricably within a ceremony or ritual, language, custom, folklore and allegory, making a complete and complex entity, an undilutable whole. He was, of course, being very self-referential and talking about the grandness of what he proposed several years later, the Ring Cycle, but he was, of course, attempting to define the genre of opera itself. Similar thoughts occupied the mind of Monteverdi almost 250 years earlier as he composed his very first opera, Orfeo, a work he described quite simply as a favola, a fable, in musica. Whereas Monteverdi or Wagner's investigations lay in the crevices of their own European traditions, I would like to strongly suggest that in some form or other, opera is not an exclusively European, but a universal phenomenon. There are very few cultures in which the most fundamental concept of a Gesamtkunstwerk, of a total all-embracing artwork, does not exist. From the various forms of Chinese opera, Japanese kabuki and no drama, to Tazieh, the ancient dramatic pageants of the Shia sect in Persia, or the Sufi devotional ceremonies of the whirling dervishes of Turkey, the voodoo rituals of Haiti, or indeed the great Sanskrit epics of India. All of these art forms are hugely operatic in their ambition and their scale. They are all Gesamtkunstwerk, but none of them are in German. Closer to home, the elaborate ceremonies transacted through poetry and song of the Aranda people of the deserts of Central Australia are in their own very complex and elaborate way a very much total, all-embracing, all-encompassing, environmentally enfolding artistic experience. There are so many more examples and I could go on. But what is the point of all this? Beyond offering a very tangible way of connecting to an artistic genre that is often seen as elitist or remote, I'm trying to honour the very notions of history and tradition wherever they may be found, to acknowledge the presence of virtuosic skill and artistic rigour in a wide variety of cultures, and in the process to urge us all to consider through the remarkable artistic achievements of an array of cultures beyond those of an exclusively European paradigm, in order to insist on a level of respect and care for ideas and values that are very different from our own, and to suggest that the benefits of any expression of respect will always be multiple and reciprocal. They will enhance every side of any perceived cultural divide. And I would suggest that it is in such places and through such experiences that one might find the building blocks, the arched contours and the centre stones of the bridges we must build for our future. I would also like to suggest that this argument is not arbitrary. Without a proper engagement with specific cultures, with specific artworks, the kind of which I have just described, we will not achieve the kind of respect or understanding so necessary for a cosmopolitan society. None of this is easy or straightforward, and it cannot be achieved if culture is considered in or treated in isolation, as nothing more than entertainment, an optional extra, a frivolous luxury. To a great extent, these ideas cannot take hold unless they are carefully and powerfully embedded in our learning or through our earliest contacts and experiences with one another. An elaborative, iterative process that requires patience and perseverance, a course both of thought and action that should begin at the very earliest of our school days. Alas, where there might be potential for learning about the Mahabharata and the searing narratives of Indian culture, or understanding the subtleties of Khun opera in its relation to Chinese history, or a Tazieh performance and how it relates to the Shia sect of Islam, surely significant aspects of any cosmopolitan society, alongside, of course, the symphonies of Beethoven or the cantatas of Bach. We rely, unfortunately, too often on a diet which is exclusively comprised of adolescent, self-expressive Rockerstedfords. There is nothing wrong with fun or frivolity, unless it becomes an overwhelming controlling metaphor for absolutely everything that occurs in a classroom. To this extent, I have a deep-seated concern at the superficiality of the education of our children, especially, though not exclusively, in the arts. And we have regressed terribly in the level of achievement we demand of music teachers today compared with a century ago. Several distinguished Australian educationalists, such as Margaret Sears and Richard Gill, have told me that the average university graduate today would have enormous difficulty coping with the most basic prerequisites to gain a teaching certificate that would have been required in 1902. The situation in Australia has deteriorated in other ways. Compared to the 60s and 70s, the range and nature of courses offered by Australian universities has been reduced to the point of absurdity. In addition to institutions offering a syllabus whose focus was European music, there were a number of departments and institutions who worked, taught and undertook research in the general area of ethnomusicology, and specifically in the music of Japan, China, India, Indonesia, Africa, Vietnam, Papua New Guinea. We've reverted to a one-size-fits-all corporatized mindset that seems to be so pervasive in many of our institutions, particularly those of higher education. To lose these senses of diverse excellence at a time of continuing population change and ever-increasing diversity in the broader Australian community seems certainly unrepresentative and indeed wasteful. To restate the obvious, any expansion of Australia's population will continue to enhance the extremely varied ethnicity of our society. That's something to celebrate, but let's also acknowledge the importance of the word culture in that misused term multiculturalism. And let's expand our creative horizons to insist that any definition of multiculturalism becomes exactly what the word means: a curiosity kindled by and genuine support for the many different cultures that comprise a secular, successful, prosperous liberal democracy, and that these values are continuously reinforced throughout our education system. Unless we urgently consider new ways to articulate, calibrate and modulate the mores of a rapidly shifting set of social conditions, so as to be mindful of the needs to remain open, generous-spirited, respectful and most of all inclusive, they could so easily spin out of control. Let me revisit the work of Iain McGilchrist for a moment. He makes a powerful point in describing those moments in our history when the flowering the best of the right hemisphere of the brain and the best of the left hemisphere working together converge for the immeasurable benefit and prosperity of humankind, as witnessed in Athens in the 6th century by the activity in the humanities and the sciences working together, or in ancient Rome during the Augustan era, or through an openness and energy that was regained during the Renaissance 1,000 years later, which brought sudden efflorescence of creative life in both the sciences and the arts. To Dr. McGilchrist's examples, I would add two of my own. That period of remarkable prosperity that existed during the height of the Caliphate of Cordoba in 10th and 11th century Spain, in which Islam, Judaism and Christianity cooperated and collaborated in such perfect harmony, or to that extraordinary period of science, art, ambition and technology that flourished in China during the Song and Ming dynasties. However, Dr. McGilchrist reminds us that these are sadly exceptions rather than the norms, and that as time passes, so the left hemisphere comes to dominate affairs and things slide back into a more theoretical, conceptualized, abstracted, bureaucratic sort of view of the world. The kind of banal mindset, I would suggest, that too often dominates the way we frame agendas and priorities to this day. I believe that the place occupied by the arts is a prism through which to perceive the equilibrium of any society. The fullness of our understanding of the value of the arts will have an inestimable impact on the world we will create for ourselves and for future generations. In a sense, this lecture is not really about the state of the arts at all. It's about the state of the world and the role that the arts can play in it, and how imaginative and open-minded we wish that world to be. If I might be so bold as to urge any kind of outcome from this presentation, I have a couple of simple suggestions. Let's not opt for the usual expensive but ultimately easy solutions of proposing to build another edifice. Instead, let's evaluate our existing institutions and insist that they become much more ambitious and better prepared to face some of the opportunities and challenges that I've spent the last 40 minutes describing. Let's give them the flexibility to do it as well. We could start by undertaking a comprehensive creative audit of the multitude of organisations through which the arts might discover new opportunities and lines of influence, quite literally the synapses and cortex of society itself. Such a process would, I am sure, be an inspiring revelation. Neuroscience and its relationship to the arts is, as I have indicated in this lecture, an obvious target and a point of departure for this kind of treatment. To be genuinely effective, government must be much more aware of its own potential and its own limitations. We must insist on a greater level of ingenuity and entrepreneurship in our public institutions, and we must properly coordinate these efforts through the mechanisms of a cultural policy that relates directly to other aspects of government activity. Integrating and assimilating the work of schools and universities with that of professional ensembles and professional artists is only the first step. It's a step that Australian governments have yet to take. I urge them to take it immediately. To do some of the work I envisage, it is not necessary to build another theatre, classroom or arts centre, nor to invent another quango or piece of bureaucracy. I work in a city which, in the month of August each year, becomes an extraordinary centre for the arts, without ever having given the slightest thought to constructing an arts centre. A state of the arts should be a matter of encouraging or reinvigorating powerful, extremely powerful allegiances and alliances wherever they might exist, in order to assert with confidence and compassion our own commitment to the values and ideals that will foster a continuum of imagination to and in which our children and our community can all aspire and share. Thank you.